What's up, guys? You're listening to The Rerun, and I am Retro Coyote. How's it going? We didn't have an episode last week because work kept me busy and I was tired, and I didn't really have much to talk about. So there we go on that. But we do have something to talk about this week. Before we get started, though, a little bit of housekeeping. If you enjoyed the content here on this channel, then please make sure to like and subscribe. Our community is growing all the time, and I'd love to have you with us. Also, if you want to support the channel more directly, there is a link down there in the description to our Patreon. It's only $1 a month, and hey, it gets you a shout out at this point in the video. That being said, this week on the Rerun, we're going to talk about game consoles. I was chatting with some of my friends, and a question came up. What is a console you never owned but would love to try? And that got me thinking about video I watched, or a couple videos I watched, about the best-selling game consoles of all time. And it's been a few years since I looked that up, so I wanted to pull up that list and take a look at what it looks like now, or as recently as we have data for, and discuss it with you a little bit. So we'll go over that. And like I said, if there's a console that you always wanted to try but never got the chance to, let me hear about it down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, we're going to get on started here. These are the best-selling game consoles. I have the list here, and I'm going to go over each one with you. We're going to talk briefly about each one and how much they sold in terms of units, in terms of consoles sold. And we're going to finish off with the top-selling game console of all time. And if you think you know what that is, well, let me know your guess in the comments. All right. So down at the bottom, sadly, is honestly my favorite game console of all time. If you've been around this channel, you probably know what it is already. It's the Dreamcast. It's a bummer because Dreamcast is awesome, man. Anyone you hear talk about the Dreamcast here on YouTube, it was ahead of its time. It was this, it was that. It really was, because there are communities for old game consoles. People still make games for them and things like that, but I've never seen a community as not rabid, but as enthusiastic for their console of choice as the Dreamcast community. New games come out for it all the time. True, a lot of them are shoot 'em ups, but it's mods for controllers, third-party controllers, new mods for things like the VMUs. All sorts of awesome stuff. Hell, my Dreamcast is modded. It has an SD card slot in there instead of the disk drive. So I can just load up games and go and play it on the original hardware. And that is really cool. But yeah, it sold 8.2 million units. Not bad. 8 million is a lot of anything. But in terms of our list here, it sits quite pretty at the bottom. So interestingly enough, though, the next step up at 8.82 million units is its immediate predecessor, the Sega Saturn. Now, you don't hear a lot about the Sega Saturn. That's because it wasn't really well regarded outside of Japan. It didn't really do well here in the States because Sega did what we now call pulling a Sega. They sold the Genesis. They sold the Game Gear, the 32X, the Sega CD, the Nomad, all these other games, or not game consoles, peripherals, add-ons, yada yada, and they oversaturated their own market to where by the time they got to the Sega Saturn, all the goodwill was burned away because none of those peripherals were any good. No one liked the 32X or the Sega CD. Now, granted, there were some good games for those, sure, but we're talking like one or two, and the library for them isn't even very big. So, and that comes down to, honestly, disagreements between Sega of Japan and Sega of America. There have been like documentaries and stuff. We're not going to get in too deep into all that. You can look it up. It's an interesting story, but not what we're here for. Next up, another Sega console, the Game Gear, as we discussed earlier, at 10.62 million. Now, I played the Game Gear when I was a kid. My dad had one, and I would play it. It was awesome. It was a color backlit screen. It wasn't a good color backlit screen, and it ate batteries like crazy, but hey, I could play Sonic and Mortal Kombat on it, so what really more did I need? So that was cool. Next up, we have the Wii U. I never got to play the Wii U, and I was never really interested in it. It seemed like an idea that really needed some more time in the oven with the way they did the controller and the little screen pad there. You can really see a lot of its DNA actually in the Switch. It's like the Switch is what the Wii U should have been. It's that idea brought to its better conclusion, if that makes sense. Next step up from that, another great portable console actually is the PS Vita. And the PS Vita is great. I talked to the Dreamcast about people having communities around their old favorite consoles and still producing stuff for them. This is very true of the Vita. People make apps and everything for it. You can still connect to the internet, and people use it now mostly as a platform for modding. It's an amazing console, and it does a whole bunch of really cool stuff. So, PS Vita sitting at 16.21 million. Not bad. Next up from that, another favorite of mine, the Nintendo GameCube. So, fantastic 6th generation console. GameCube didn't do as well as they really thought it would, but the 6th generation is really special because it was one of the last generations to really feel like just a straight up game console. You use it to play games. It might play CDs, it might play DVDs, but you're here for the games, right? Now, obviously, GameCube didn't do any of that, and that's probably part of what held it back. It used those little mini discs to play games, little tiny CDs. Now, there were some amazing games for it. Beautiful, amazing games that are classics to this day. And honestly, if they came out with like a GameCube Mini, or like if they put some GameCube games up on the Switch, the ones that are there probably sell like hotcakes, Yeah. Pikmin, Metroid Prime series, the Smash Brothers Melee. Amazing games. Like I said, tons of classics. And tons of really weird ones on there, too. Because especially, like, right after Sega decided to go third party, a lot of their weirder titles kind of ended up on the GameCube, like Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg. If you ever find yourself in possession of GameCube, you have some good gaming capacity there. So, dust off your old GameCube. And they're sitting at 21.74 million units. Very good. 21 million, almost 22 million. Just above that is the original Microsoft Xbox. This is Microsoft's first outing as a game console producer. And yeah, it was really good. They really started to push Xbox Live when it came out. It was one of the first consoles to really, because the Dreamcast did it to a lesser extent. It's like, yeah, there's internet on it. You can't, Vantage Star Online, whatever. But Xbox really pushed, like, this is part of the Xbox experience, is playing online. And LAN parties. I don't hear about any other console having LAN parties, just Xbox. And I remember some of my friends bringing theirs over, hooking it up and playing Halo together. I stepped in and got my face wrecked because I'm terrible at Halo. But to this day, people still use tunneling software to play online on their original Xboxes for things like Quake and Halo and other similar games. So there's still a community of online Xbox players, if you can believe it. Lots of good games trapped on the Xbox, like Jet Set Radio Future and a lot of others. Modding for the original Xbox, or I should say emulation for it, is in a kind of a weird place right now. It's still being worked on. It's doable, but it's just not very good, which is weird because it's Microsoft, but, whatever. The original Xbox is sitting at 24.5 million units, just over 24.5 million, so not bad. Not bad at all. Just above that, we're going back to the wood age, going back to the 80s with the Atari 2600, sitting at 27.64 million units. Of course, when you think of the Atari, you think of the Atari 2600. It really is the classic Atari. Enough said, honestly, but yeah, like it's the with the joystick and the button, like it's iconic. It was one of the first really popular home consoles for gaming. It popularized playing games in the home, and so while it's not the biggest, their games obviously are very primitive. It led the way, it walked so all these other consoles could run. And that's not to say there aren't a lot of great games on. There are. Just like with a lot of the other consoles, people still develop for it. A little basic, and you could make a game for the Atari 2600. It's not terribly difficult. I played around a long time ago and made like a barely functional Space Invaders clone. So yeah, like people still, like there's a Halo 2600, if you can believe it. It's crazy to think about, but yeah. Atari 2600 sitting at 27.64 million units. Not bad. Moving on up, true classic, Sega Genesis. One of the first consoles I ever actually had in my room as a kid. Amazing console, sitting pretty at 29.5 million units. For the Sega Genesis. Now, if you're over in Europe or anywhere other than America, it's the Sega Mega Drive instead of the Genesis. But no matter what you call this console, man, did it have reach and lifespan all over the world. Obviously, here in America, it was a big hit. It sold for a very long time. In Japan, it was pretty good. Europe loved their Mega Drive, very much so, but surprisingly enough, throughout the different console revisions, we see quite a lot of love for it over in Brazil. Brazil Tech Toys was largely responsible for the popularization of the Model 3 Genesis. So that was super awesome. Yeah, Brazil, they love Sonic, they love Sega over there, and that's a big part of why. It's a big part of their gaming heritage over there. So very cool. Just above that, sitting at 32.93, almost 33 million units, is the Nintendo 64, another classic console. Fifth generation, brought us into the 3D era. Very cool. Obviously, a lot of classic games there. Mario 64, the original Smash Brothers, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, respectively. But you don't really see a lot of indie development for the N64, mostly because they were one of the last to use cartridges, actually, because specifically for that reason, they didn't want pirates messing with their stuff. Which, that's kind of always been Nintendo's attitude, but it hasn't really lent itself to a lot of people, modding and stuff. You see that more with Sega, which is a shame because the Nintendo 64 definitely has a very solid aesthetic, if that makes sense. You can tell something is from the Nintendo 64 just by looking at it. It has its own kind of flavor of 3D, if that makes sense. So a very good game console. Next step up, actually, we're very close to present day here with the Xbox One. If you can believe it, sitting at 47.35 million units sold for the Xbox One. I have an Xbox One. It's pretty good. Still works just fine. Not bad at all. It has a lot of backwards compatibility with its predecessors, the 360 and the original Xbox, which is great. By no means is it like total at all. There's like a list online you can find for what works and what doesn't. And like I said, there are still some great games, sadly, that are trapped on the original consoles. But by and large, that they did it at all is fantastic. And Xbox has a reputation for supporting their old games, making them available. So that's always a game winner, to pardon the pun, in my opinion. Taking our next step up, we have the Super NES sitting at 49.1 million units. Super Nintendo, obvious classic, sequel to the NES. But yeah, man, Super Nintendo was awesome. Obviously, a lot of classic games there. One of my favorites was the Kirby All-Star or Kirby Superstar Collection. Very good, very fun. A lot of those games in there are two-player co-op. We have the Mario All-Star Collection, which is probably one of the best remakes ever. You got the original Super Mario Brothers and tons of other classic Mario games. How do you beat that? It's awesome. And then there are tons of other games, a lot of good role-playing games like Final Fantasy and all that on there too. So it definitely cemented its place in history. Moving on up, the Nintendo Switch. Wow, yeah, sitting at almost 56 million units. So yeah, the Nintendo Switch is doing some amazing numbers. That's fantastic. So yeah, man, I thought Switch would be a lot higher, but I guess not. Wow. Okay. So Nintendo Switch has had a pretty long lifespan as far as game consoles go. If you pay attention to the gaming news, which I'm assuming you do if you're watching this, Switch 2 was just recently announced. Now, Nintendo consoles these days, in the last 20 some odd years or so, haven't always been the most powerful things on the planet, but they always offer a unique selection of games, fantastic experiences. They've had gimmicks with every console, which I'm not always a fan of. They're kind of hit and miss with it, but they offer some solid gaming experiences, so definitely worth your time to check out. Speaking of which, just on top of the Switch, we have the original NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, sitting at 61.91 million units. Almost 62 million. That's wow, right? So yeah, NES, Nintendo, the ugly gray box back from the 80s. It weathered the storm and brought us back from the gaming crash in the mid-80s and made gaming popular with the masses. Now, the 2600 brought gaming into our homes, but the Nintendo Entertainment System brought gaming to millions. I've heard it said that the Atari made it work, Nintendo made it popular. I don't know how popular it really was back in the 80s for Nintendo, but you get what I'm saying. Absolutely classic. There's hundreds of games for it, probably thousands. Not all of them are very good, but if you watch the old Angry Video Game Nerd episodes, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's classic, and no one can argue. There are some amazing gaming experiences there. A lot of you can play on the Switch, because they got the Nintendo Online. A lot of the older games they make available, which I think is really cool. But Nintendo Entertainment System, you still see knockoffs, little... they're called Famiclones. You'll see them at the mall, the little plug-and plays. So the love for it still goes strong to this day, albeit in a rather weird and kind of knockoff form. But yeah, absolutely. The Nintendo Entertainment System is a classic, and nobody's going to argue that. Just above that, sitting at 75.23 million units, is the Nintendo 3DS. So yeah, man, Nintendo 3DS was awesome. Obviously, when I get a Game Boy, I really only ever play Pokemon on it. So I'm not the best person to talk about Nintendo portables, but I assume that's honestly with what a lot of kids did was they got it and they just played Pokemon, right? So, very cool. So we won't talk too much on that because I don't have that much experience with it, but PlayStation Portable just above it, something I have a lot more experience with, sitting at 81.09 million. Getting into some pretty high numbers now. It was really one of the first portable media players we had. This was getting to be about the point in the early 2000s where digital music players were a thing. So you could load up your music, videos, pictures onto your PSP, and it had a camera. I have a camera attachment. It's pretty grainy, but for its time, it was pretty cool. Obviously, the games were great, and you had a collection of movies available on those little tiny media discs that they had for it. You got to remember, this was Sony, and they had a movie production studio, so you had a fantastic selection of what's now regarded as like a time capsule of that early 2000s era. You had TV shows, movies, all sorts of stuff available. And nowadays they're cheap, so if you ever find yourself in a retro gaming store, pick a couple up. It's definitely worth it. Definitely. I love it. It's still one of my favorite handhelds to this day. PSP. So moving right along here, the Game Boy Advance, 81 million. I'm sorry, 81.5 million. Just above the PSP. And yeah, Nintendo usually does better with handhelds. Because Sony has a tendency to kill those handhelds pretty quick. But yeah, I had the Game Boy Advance. I even played a couple of games that weren't Pokemon, if you can believe it. They had a lot of games out there for the Game Boy Advance, and they were reasonably cheap. Obviously, you had the Pokemon, but you have a lot of NES classics they released, too. Like I said, for cheap. So you could play the old Nintendo games on your Game Boy Advance. Now, once they brought out the SP, got the backlight, and it was amazing. Once you had the backlight on it, you were off to the races. It folded up clamshell style. You could fit into your pocket a lot easier. The original model was still a bit clunky, but it was awesome. It was a really, really great system. There was a lot you could do with it by connecting it up to your GameCube for things like Pokemon and other things. So absolutely, if you get your hands on one, it's absolutely worth a look, especially with the wide library and Game Boy Advance video. It's not really the nicest resolution, but like if you were a kid and someone handed you, hey, watch Pokemon cartoons on your Game Boy, heck yeah, you were a happy kid back then, man. Moving on up, we're getting into the we're probably in the top 10 now. We got the Xbox 360. If the original Xbox made it popular to play online with your friends, the 360 made it ubiquitous. Gaming clans formed there that still roll together to this day. Whenever someone thinks of playing online with the headset, telling people awful things about your mother, they're probably thinking back to when they played the Xbox 360. This brought things like achievements to the forefront. To this day, there's a whole group of, community of achievement hunters. So that's what they do. They 100% complete a game by grabbing all the achievements, upping their gamer score, all that sorts of stuff. And we owe all that to the 360. And it even brought up some backwards compatibility, which was awesome. So Xbox 360 sitting about almost 86 million units. Well done. That's absolutely impressive. Just above that, at 87.4 million units, is the PS3. PS3 was an amazing console, still is. It didn't do as well as the 360. Obviously, it sold more units and had some amazing games and things like PlayStation Home. But as far as being fondly remembered, I don't think it did as well, really, as the Xbox 360. The reasons for that are here and there, but they sold more. They ended up winning that generation because they had amazing single-player experiences. So they also had backwards compatibility, just like the Xbox 360, where they had not only PS2 compatibility, but PS1 compatibility. And you didn't need your memory card for the PS1 or PS2 because it saved it to the hard drive, and you could swap that out. So that was really cool. And you could do that with a 360 too, but the PlayStation 3 made use of a lot more portable technology in terms of the hard drives and things like SD cards, USB sticks. It was a Blu-ray player in an age where that was the new thing. After DVDs, they were looking for the next step up from that. And for a while, it was Blu-ray versus HD DVD. And Blu-ray obviously ended up winning out, and that was a Sony proprietary format. And the PS3 was the first console to offer that in an age where that was still expensive. So we're going to get into Sony's DVD capability here later on in the list, but that's usually a game winner for them. The PS1 even had an interesting fact about it. We'll get to it when we get to the PS1, but let's move on. So the PS3, again, 87.4 million. Well done indeed. Stepping next up from that is the Nintendo Wii, selling at about 101.6 million. We're in the triple digits now, folks. So the Nintendo Wii, especially the launch model, I have. It's amazing. It really is. Because, and I'm talking about the launch model here, y'all. It can play GameCube games. You got your GameCube, too. amazing. And it's no like, is it does it play? This is not with the Xbox. It plays GameCube games, and it plays Wii games. And the Wii has a fantastic, very large library, very cheap games, so you can build a sizable library for not a lot of money. And everybody played the Wii. I did, you did, your mom plays the Wii, grandma plays the Wii, her dog probably played the Wii at some point. Everybody. You'll see this thing in dentist's office, old folks' homes. Gamers play video games, but everybody played the Wii. And that's why we're seeing such a substantial jump up from the previous mention on this list, the PS3, because they really wanted to bring gaming to everyone. And that's something I kind of have to give Nintendo credit for there. Even if the motion controls were a bit dodgy at the jump, boy, did they make it work with the marketing, because they really did get this into everyone's homes. You can find a launch model Wii for $50-$60 on eBay if you look. And man, it is worth it. You could probably find it cheaper than that. I found a Wii once for $20 at a Goodwill. So if you can get your hands on one of these things, it is worth every penny, because you're going to have a good time, especially if you are willing to take the time to sit there and mod it. You can run it all digitally if you wanted to, and there's like a homebrew channel. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. But the Wii is an amazing console, even stock. It's an amazing console, and that's why it jumps us into the triple digits here. Just above that, the original Sony PlayStation. So, I was talking to you about this during the PlayStation 3 section. Yeah, the PlayStation 1, the original launch model, was, at the time, the best consumer-grade CD player on the market. And this was in the mid-90s, when that technology wasn't terribly new, but it was still, most people were listening to cassette tapes. To get the best in the business right in with your gaming console was amazing. And the PS1, for the games, oh my God. Nintendo 64 brought us into the 3D era. The Sony PlayStation showed us it could be awesome. That's not to say N64 wasn't awesome, but there's a reason N64 is way lower on this list than the Sony PlayStation. So many great games, so many great experiences, guys. If you can get your hands on a Sony PlayStation, definitely do so, because I have a PS1, like the slim model. It's a lot smaller, a lot sleeker, a lot nicer, and there's a screen, if you can find one of them that hasn't been torn apart by modders. It's amazing. It's a great console, guys, so definitely check it out. PS4. Jumping up several generations. Well, by the way, the PlayStation 1, 102.5 million units. PlayStation 4, next step up. Still a great console. You can still use it to this day. Amazing game console. And, obviously, it's these days, it's sitting on a lot of people's entertainment systems as their media player. Okay. Netflix, this, that, and the other. It's your media player. It's your media station for your TV. And that's kind of true of the Xbox One. Of those generations, game consoles kind of became less and less game systems and more media centers. You know what I mean? Let me know in the comments if you feel the same way. But PlayStation 4 is sitting about 109.8 million, almost 110. God dang. Just above that, we're talking about the Game Boy. Woo! Game Boy brought handheld gaming to the masses. Now, you did have handheld video games before with the Mr. Game & Watch and the little Tiger Electronic and the little electronic football games, but Game Boy, you could have a console with games like your Nintendo. Not as nice, yeah, but you could play games like those you played at home on the go. Yes, it ate batteries. Yes, the screen was an ugly shade of puke green, but it brought something new to the world of gaming, and it sold 118 million units. And that's why. I don't know if they're including Game Boy Color in that, I don't see it here on this list, but we'll assume that they are. Even if, like, oh man, and it came with a game. When you bought it in the box, it came with Tetris. And there's a reason everybody knows Tetris, because it came with the Game Boy. Right? Now, just above that, another Nintendo console, the DS. The DS was their style of handheld gaming perfected. The dual screen was a gimmick, but it was a gimmick done well, for the most part. Obviously, it depended on what game you were playing. The Gen 4 Pokemon games are some of my favorite. They're a lot of people's favorite. They're great games, and a lot of other amazing games out there. Played around with the dual screen gimmick, like Nintendogs was awesome. A lot of those really weird pets games. I love digital pets, so that was a lot of what I played. Even to this day, people still emulate the DS on their phones, which obviously touchscreen technology that works really well. And for me, for things like emulation, we're starting to see those fold-out phones again with the screen all the way down. I'd love to get my hands on one of those just to play around with it, to see if I could turn it into a like a DS emulator, right? Maybe play some 3DS games on there. Could be fun. But yeah, the Nintendo DS, 154.9 million units sold. That's incredible. And it was, the first models were backwards compatible with the Game Boy Advance. So you had, your DS library, which was really, really big to start with. Then you had the enormous library and the very cheap library, right, of the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. And that's really a big thing, because backwards compatibility really is a game winner. And I wish we'd brought that back more often in terms of physical discs, because you don't see that anymore. Obviously, we're in the digital age now. Nothing is physical anymore, and that's a shame. But the number one top-selling game console of all time, according to this list, which comes to us in the year 2024, all right, is the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 is the best game console of all time, and has been for years. It basically, it was Sony's 1-2 punch. It killed the Dreamcast, and it was basically to show the world that the PS1 was no fluke. They knew what they were doing. Sony, a lot of people just know Sony for their games. But people forget, like I said with the PSP, they have a movie, like an entertainment division, but they started as an audio company. So they can do it all. Audio, video, games, yada, yada, yada. They're an entertainment company. Now is what I'd call them. And boy, oh boy, the PS2. We got the PS2 when it came out. We had the fat PS2, the launch model. It played PS2 games, obviously, which were great. Tons of classics. Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, Twisted Metal, some of the new Mortal Kombat, not new, but the 3D Mortal Kombat games. And it played PS1. Amazing. Right? Oh, so good. It also played CDs. And in an age where this was the new thing, it played DVDs. And that is what moved units. You got to remember, when the PS2 came out, a lot of places didn't even have DVD players. DVDs were the brand new thing. To get a DVD player at that time, you'd almost be paying the same price you'd pay for a PS2. A lot of like pawn shops and places like that would use a PS2 as their DVD player because it was because they had those. They didn't have DVD players, right? So it really brought DVD technology and amazing gaming experiences into a lot of people's homes. And of course, like most 6th generation game consoles, it also had online capability. But you didn't really see a whole lot of that, hardly at all, with the PS2. You saw it with with the Xbox and to a lesser extent with the Dreamcast. Hardly at all with the GameCube. I don't even think the GameCube had online capability. I think that might have been planned, but it never really, hit the deck with it. But PS2 had it. A little modem you could plug into it. And I've heard whispers of some people hopping back online with the PS2, but nowhere near as big as the Xbox. But it really didn't matter because This was one of the last, 6th gen was one of the last generations of couch co-op and couch versus, couch, local multiplayer is what we called it now, but amazing games. It really was special, the PS2. We still have a lot of our old PS2 games and series that are still classics to this day that people think of when they think of PlayStation. Spider-Man, God of War, to a lesser extent, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. They had amazing 3D platformers. That's honestly, I think, what they had the most of. That was what they really became known for, was 3D platformers. And they did it better than anyone else. Anyone else at the time. Like, to a point, PS2 was just showing off, man. There's a reason they're top dog here on this list. But if you get yourself a PS2 or PS3, you're also going to have access to the PS1 because backwards compatibility is awesome. And all that is really what made Sony special. Is they're one of the kings of backwards compatibility. At least they were. And then Xbox kind of copied their homework, and we love them for it. But anyway, PS2, still best-selling game console of all time, man. So tell me your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And like I said, if you enjoyed the content here on this video, then make sure to like and subscribe. We're always growing our community, and hey, I'd love to have you with us. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.